Have you noticed how great nations rarely fall with a bang? More often, they crumble with a sigh. I still remember watching the Berlin Wall come down in '89, people cheering as history turned in real time. But today, I wonder, what happens when the wall isn't physical, but moral, financial, or political? France, once the proud symbol of liberté, égalité, fraternité, faces that question now. Not through war or invasion, but through a slow-motion collapse. And this isn't just Europe's problem. Every democracy, including ours, should pay attention. France once stood as a beacon of stability, elegant, strong, balanced. Now, it's drowning in debt exceeding $4 trillion, over 110% of its GDP. Political paralysis, protests in the streets, a nation on edge. I've seen turmoil before, Watergate, impeachments, but what's happening there feels like history's warning bell ringing again. The question is, will anyone listen? To see how France reached this point, we need to look back, to the ashes of World War II, when the nation promised its people security from cradle to grave, free health care, free education, generous pensions. The state will protect you became their creed, and for decades it worked. Prosperity, stability, pride. Proof that capitalism and compassion could coexist. Until now. This wasn't so different from America's post-war optimism, was it? We had our own dreams. The GI Bill, Social Security, Medicare on the horizon. Both nations believed the government could lift everyone, that we were building something to last forever. But forever has a price tag, and France kept paying it with borrowed money. For over 50 years, every single year since 1974, France has run a budget deficit. That's not crisis spending, that's a habit. Left or right, every government did the same thing. Spend, promise, borrow. The French welfare state wasn't funded by magic. It was funded by debt. And as long as growth was strong and rates were low, that debt seemed manageable. But debt is like water behind a dam. Pressure builds quietly until one day it breaks. The bill came due with demographics. The welfare system was built for a world of big families and growing populations, 5 workers for every retiree. Today, it's just 3, and shrinking fast. Retirees already make up 22% of France's population. By 2050, it'll be nearly 30%. People are living longer, 11 years longer than 50 years ago, which is a human triumph, but a fiscal nightmare. We've got the same storm brewing here in America. Social Security, Medicare, we talk, we delay, we kick the can. France just shows us what happens when there's no road left. But demographics didn't break France alone. They just exposed deeper cracks. The economy stalled. France's young people are among the most educated in Europe, yet nearly 1 in 4 works a job below their qualifications. Overqualified, underemployed, it's a slow drain of hope and productivity. And when dreamers can't find work, frustration replaces faith. The young feel stuck. The middle class feels overtaxed. Retirees feel insecure. Everyone feels betrayed, and nobody trusts the system to fix it. For many years, though, these deep structural problems remained hidden from plain sight. They were masked by a favorable international environment that let politicians keep postponing the difficult decisions. And the single biggest mask of all was the creation of the euro at the turn of the millennium. When France joined the euro, something remarkable happened. Suddenly, it could borrow money at record low rates. Lenders, confident in the backing of the entire eurozone, especially Germany, treated France like a safer bet than it really was. It was like getting a premium credit card based on your wealthy neighbor's credit score. And with that easy credit, France spent freely. It created a dangerous illusion of stability. Cheap debt felt like free money. Why risk strikes or political backlash by cutting spending or raising the retirement age when you could just borrow? Every government, left or right, took the path of least resistance. They promised, they borrowed, and they postponed the reckoning. Then the shocks came. First, the 2008 financial crisis. France's economy stumbled, tax revenues fell, and spending soared on bailouts and social support. In just 2 years, national debt jumped from 60% to 80% of GDP, a clear warning that the system was far more fragile than it looked. But unlike Greece or Spain, France was too big to fail. The European Central Bank slashed interest rates to save the Eurozone, and suddenly, borrowing was cheap again. Instead of reforming, France doubled down. More spending, more debt, fewer workers to support it all. They bet that low interest rates would last forever. And then came the pandemic. COVID froze the world overnight. France, like everyone else, opened the floodgates of spending. Billions in aid, furloughs, business loans, hospital funding. It was necessary, yes, but it came at a devastating fiscal cost. The bill for decades of easy credit finally landed, with interest. By the time the dust settled, France's national debt had soared past 110% of GDP, the highest since World War II. For the first time in modern history, the country owed more than its entire economy produced. The illusion was over. Cheap money was gone, interest rates were rising, and the true cost of France's promises came crashing in. At the center of it all stood one enormous problem: pensions. Once the proud pillar of France's post-war social contract, the pension system has become an unsustainable burden. Last year alone, it cost over 350 billion euros, about 14% of GDP, far above the EU average. France now spends more on pensions than on education, defense, and transport combined. The reason is simple and devastating. France's system is pay-as-you-go. Today's workers fund today's retirees. There's no trust fund, no savings pool, just money in, money out. With fewer workers and more retirees living longer, the math no longer works. Everyone knows it. Economists, investors, the government. Yet every attempt to fix it has triggered chaos. That brings us to Emmanuel Macron's 2023 reform. His proposal was modest by global standards. Raise the retirement age from 62 to 64. Germany and Italy already sit at 67. Even in America, it's 66 or 67. On paper, it was a small, necessary step. But the backlash was explosive. Millions flooded the streets. Strikes shut down transport and schools. Garbage piled up in Paris. Nearly 70% of French citizens opposed the reform, even as economists warned it was essential to prevent collapse. Macron faced an impossible choice: protect stability or preserve democracy's process. In the end, he forced the reform through using Article 49.3, a constitutional shortcut that bypassed a parliamentary vote. And with that, France's long-simmering crisis turned into a political firestorm. Instead of calming tensions, Macron's move was seen as authoritarian arrogance. His approval ratings collapsed. His government barely survived a no-confidence vote. And though the reform passed, it came at a staggering political cost. His party lost its majority, leaving him weakened, isolated, and unable to push through major changes. He won the battle, but lost the war. But this wasn't new. It's a cycle that's haunted France for decades. Every president who's tried to reform pensions has faced the same revolt. Streets packed with protesters, strikes shutting down the country, reforms watered down or abandoned. France is trapped in a paradox. It must reform to survive, yet every reform attempt ignites a national uprising. The result is paralysis. The government can't act, the crisis deepens, and frustration spreads. That paralysis has now morphed into something darker: political collapse. Macron's centrist movement, once a hopeful bridge between left and right, has splintered, leaving a vacuum now filled by the extremes. At the center of it all stands Macron himself. Once seen as visionary, now viewed as out of touch. 3/4 of French voters want him gone. The presidency, built by de Gaulle as a republican monarchy, works only when the nation trusts its monarch. But Macron's lofty Jupiterian style, ruling from above rather than listening from below, has turned that power into a liability. France isn't just facing economic reckoning anymore. It's facing a crisis of confidence in leadership, in democracy, and in itself. That perception was disastrously reinforced when he forced through the pension reform against the will of the people. It confirmed what many French citizens already suspected, that their president didn't really care what they thought. This sense of isolation was compounded by a spectacular political miscalculation. Unhappy with the results of the European Parliament elections, Macron dissolved the National Assembly and called for snap legislative elections. clearly expecting voters would rally behind him and strengthen his parliamentary position. The opposite happened. His party suffered further losses. Parliament became even more fragmented and hostile. Multiple factions now compete for control, none with a clear majority, all with competing visions. Macron became what we'd call a lame duck president, still in office but stripped of real power, unable to advance his agenda. His original vision of pro-business, pro-reform, Macronism has effectively disappeared, replaced by a desperate struggle just to keep the government functioning day to day. This hollowing out of the political center has created fertile ground for something we've seen before in history, the rise of extremist forces, and the most notable of these is the far-right National Rally, led by Marine Le Pen. For years, the French political establishment held together through an unwritten rule, something they called the Republican Front. Whenever the far right threatened to gain power, all the mainstream parties, left, right, and center, would unite to block them. It was an understanding that transcended normal political competition. We might disagree on policy, but we all agree that extremism has no place in government. That front is now dead. The National Rally has successfully capitalized on widespread public anger and deep-seated mistrust of what many perceive as a corrupt, self-serving Parisian elite. Le Pen has undertaken what political strategists call a masterful rebranding, softening her party's image and rhetoric to make it appear more moderate, more socially acceptable. While the party's core anti-immigration and nationalist positions remain unchanged, she presents herself as the defender of the ordinary French citizen against the forces of globalization and a political class that's left them behind. And you know what? A lot of people are listening. I remember back in 2002 when Marine Le Pen's father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, made it to the presidential runoff. The entire country rose up in protest, millions in the streets declaring, "Not in our name." The idea of a Le Pen presidency was unthinkable, and voters across the spectrum united to prevent it. That sentiment is gone now. Today, a significant portion of the electorate is so fed up with the entire political system that they're willing to take a chance on the far right. The National Rally strategy is clear and, I have to admit, politically effective. They block all attempts at compromise in Parliament, budget negotiations, key legislation, anything that might make the government look functional. Their goal is to make the country ungovernable, to force new elections which current polls suggest they're in a strong position to win, and the old taboo, the sense that supporting the far right was beyond the pale, that's evaporating like morning mist. But radicalization isn't happening on just one side. The political landscape is also being pulled leftward by anti-democratic far-left movements gaining traction. These voices, often characterized by anti-establishment fury and sometimes troubling undertones, further fragment the political landscape. When both extremes grow stronger simultaneously, the center doesn't just weaken, it collapses entirely. And that makes a return to stable, consensus-based governance seem almost impossible. We've seen this pattern before, haven't we? When trust fades, extremes thrive. When people stop believing the system works for them, they become willing to burn it down and try something, anything, different. It happened in the 1930s. It's happened in various forms throughout history. And now, we're watching it unfold in real time in one of the world's oldest democracies. The question becomes, what happens next? And the answer to that question matters far beyond France's borders. Because here's the thing, this crisis isn't contained. France's political paralysis and economic decay have sent shockwaves through international financial markets, placing the entire Eurozone in an extraordinarily precarious position. Investor confidence, once unshakable in a core European economy like France, has collapsed. And when confidence collapses, real consequences follow. The major credit rating agencies, organizations like Moody's and Fitch that essentially judge a country's financial health, have taken notice. They've downgraded France's credit rating to historic lows. Now, that might sound abstract, but it has very concrete effects. A lower credit rating means it's more expensive for France to borrow money. Investors, perceiving higher risk of default, demand higher interest rates in return for lending to the French government. In a deeply worrying development, the interest rate on French government bonds is now roughly on par with Italy's. Think about that for a moment. Italy has long been considered one of the Eurozone's most significant financial risks. High debt, political instability, economic stagnation. France used to be seen as fundamentally different, more stable, more trustworthy. Not anymore. The financial markets are telling us they see similar risks in both countries now. The current indicators are flashing red in ways that draw unsettling parallels to the last great European debt crisis. Back in 2010, just before Greece's crisis exploded into the open, Greek government bonds were yielding around 3.3%. Right now, French bonds are trading at almost the exact same level. Back then, all it took was a small spark, a slip in confidence, a wave of selling by nervous investors, for Greece's borrowing costs to spiral out of control. Within months, Greece was locked out of financial markets entirely, forced into a massive international bailout with devastating conditions attached. France is now flirting with that same risk. But here's what makes this situation exponentially more dangerous. France is simply too big to fail. While Greece is a relatively small economy that could be contained, France's economy is nearly 10 times larger. Its national debt, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3.3 trillion euros, is so immense that a traditional bailout would be extraordinarily difficult, perhaps impossible, to assemble. Who has that kind of money lying around? Moreover, France's systemic importance as a founding member and the second largest economy in the Eurozone means its failure would undermine the credibility of the entire European project. The EU has rules, you see, fiscal rules that were supposed to ensure stability. Member states aren't supposed to run deficits greater than 3% of GDP. They're supposed to keep debt levels below 60% of GDP. France is flagrantly breaking both rules and has been for years. Its deficit is running around 6%, double the limit. Its debt is nearly double the limit. If even a core founding member isn't following the rules, why should anyone trust the system? Why should investors believe in the euro? It's like finding out the bank president has been embezzling. Suddenly, everyone wants their money out. This reality forces the European Central Bank and European leaders into an impossible choice. Option 1. The ECB could step in and rescue France, buying up massive quantities of French bonds to prevent a market panic and keep borrowing costs down. They've done it before for other countries, but such a move would create massive moral hazard, essentially telling all member states that fiscal discipline is optional because the central bank will always bail them out. What incentive would any government have to make tough decisions if they know the ECB will always be there as a backstop? Option 2. Refuse the rescue and let market forces take their course. But that would mean allowing one of the founding pillars of the European Union to collapse, an event that could trigger financial contagion so severe it might lead to the disintegration of the euro itself. Banks across Europe hold French bonds. Pension funds across Europe are invested in French assets. If France goes down, it could pull others with it in a chain reaction of defaults and bank failures. Neither option is acceptable, yet one will eventually have to be chosen. That's what makes this crisis so dangerous. There's no good answer, only bad ones and worse ones. The geopolitical fallout would be equally severe. An internally focused France, consumed by political and economic problems, can no longer play its traditional role as a strategic engine for the European Union on the world stage. For decades, the Franco-German partnership has been the twin engine driving European integration. Forward. When France and Germany agreed on something, it usually happened. When they disagreed, the EU stalled. But now, that engine is sputtering, and it could get worse, much worse. Imagine a government led by the National Rally coming to power in Paris. Such a government would likely be fundamentally opposed to deeper European integration. It has historically maintained sympathetic ties with Putin's Russia. Troubling given the current geopolitical situation with the war in Ukraine, the rise of such a government wouldn't just stall Franco-German cooperation. It would fundamentally reshape the balance of power in Europe with profound and unpredictable consequences. Instead of collaboration on critical issues, climate change, digital regulation, collective security, support for Ukraine, the continent would likely witness a new era of discord, contentious debates over EU budget contributions, the primacy of national law versus EU treaties, border control policies, All of this could paralyze the bloc's decision-making, leaving it rudderless in a world increasingly dominated by great power competition between the United States, China, and others. The European Union's ability to act as a cohesive force would be critically undermined, perhaps fatally. And in a world where unity increasingly matters, where economic and military might are increasingly concentrated in a few large powers, a divided Europe would find itself increasingly irrelevant. That should concern us here in America too, because a strong, stable, democratic Europe has been a cornerstone of American foreign policy since 1945. But let me bring this back to something more fundamental, because I think France's predicament is about more than economics and geopolitics. It's a mirror reflecting a broader challenge facing the entire Western world. We're all wrestling with similar demons, just in different forms. Aging societies where the old outnumber the young, where the ratio of workers to retirees keeps shrinking. We've got that here in America. Japan has it. Most of Europe has it. The social contract built in the post-war era assumed endless growth and expanding populations. That assumption is breaking down everywhere. Political polarization where the center cannot hold and the extremes grow stronger. We've certainly seen that here at home, haven't we? The rise of movements on both left and right that reject compromise, that view politics as total war rather than democratic deliberation. France isn't unique in that. They're just further along the path. Governments are afraid to reform because reform is politically toxic. Every time a leader tries to touch entitlements, tries to adjust retirement ages, tries to bring spending in line with revenue, they face massive resistance. So most don't even try. They kick the can down the road and hope they'll be out of office before the reckoning comes. That's not leadership. That's cowardice. But it's become the norm across the democratic world. I've thought a lot about this over the years, watching administrations come and go, watching Congress punt on Social Security reform decade after decade. And I've come to believe the problem isn't just policy, it's trust. When people trust their government, when they believe their leaders have the country's best interests at heart, they're willing to accept difficult measures. They understand shared sacrifice. But when that trust erodes, when people believe the system is rigged, when they think politicians only care about themselves and their donors, then every proposed reform looks like a betrayal. You can't fix a country by yelling at half of it. Whether it's Paris or Washington, the solution isn't just better policy papers or smarter economic plans. It's rebuilding the bonds of trust and shared purpose that make difficult reforms possible. And I'll be honest with you, I don't have a magic formula for how to do that. But I know it starts with leaders who listen more than they lecture, who acknowledge legitimate grievances rather than dismissing them, who treat politics as the art of finding common ground rather than crushing opponents. France's crisis is a warning to us all. It shows what happens when you postpone hard choices for too long, when you let debt compound year after year, when you allow the political center to collapse and extremes fill the vacuum. But it's also a reminder that crises don't appear overnight. They build slowly through 1,000 small decisions and non-decisions until suddenly the weight becomes unbearable. So, where does this story end? Well, it hasn't ended yet. France is still writing this chapter. But let me leave you with a thought that's been on my mind lately. The fall of a nation doesn't begin in the streets with riots and revolution. It begins much earlier and much quieter, when people stop believing they share the same story. When we becomes us versus them, when the future feels like something to fear rather than something to build together. That's when the foundation cracks, long before the building comes down. France still has time to rewrite its story. The reforms are known. Everyone understands what needs to happen. Retirement ages need to adjust to demographic reality. Spending needs to come in line with revenue. Productivity needs to improve. Political leaders need to find ways to work together rather than tear each other down. None of this is impossible. It just requires political courage and public willingness to accept change. Whether France can muster both remains to be seen. But here's what keeps me up at night. We face many of the same challenges. Our national debt is enormous and growing. Our entitlement programs are on unsustainable paths. Our politics have become increasingly polarized and dysfunctional. We're not as far down the road as France, but we're heading in the same direction. And if we're not careful, if we don't start making different choices, we could end up in a similar place. I don't say this to be alarmist or pessimistic. I say it because I believe in this country and what it stands for. I've lived through enough history to know that America has faced existential challenges before and come through them. The Civil War, the Great Depression, World War II, the Civil Rights Movement, the Cold War. We've survived and thrived because at critical moments, enough Americans chose unity over division, sacrifice over selfishness, the long term over the short term. We can do it again, but only if we learn from others' mistakes, only if we're willing to have honest conversations about hard truths, only if we rebuild trust in our institutions and in each other. France is showing us what happens when those things break down. Let's not follow that same path. If this kind of story makes you think, or maybe reminds you of a time when leaders talked more about duty than division, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Have you noticed similar patterns here at home? Do you remember a time when politics felt less like warfare and more like genuine debate? What do you think it would take to get back to that? And if you'd like more deep dives like this, where we try to understand the big currents shaping our world without all the shouting and finger pointing, go ahead and click that subscribe button. We may not fix the world here, but we can sure try to understand it together, because understanding, I've found, is the first step toward wisdom. And wisdom, friends, is what we need most right now. Thank you for taking this journey with me today. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.